Typically, we're so caught up with the MMORPGs that we have to look forward to that we often neglect the MMORPGs that currently exist. This isn't your average best MMORPG list though, it's gonna be something a little bit different. It's a look at games that are unique and more obscure, games that you have no doubt completely overlooked for whatever reason. Before we go any further though, did you know that we currently stream a variety of different MMOs over on Twitch? If you're interested, come on over and join us at twitch.tv/MMOBite. We stream every Tuesday, Saturday, and Sunday at 3 p.m. EST, and we would love to have you play with us. And yeah, we're actually gonna be streaming a couple hours after this video goes live. So I mean, what have you got to lose? It's a Saturday afternoon, right? Now, do remember, when going into this list, it is not a list of the best looking, the best playing MMOs on the market right now. It is a list of obscure titles that you probably overlooked. I'm gonna go ahead and start this off with Black Gold Online. It was an MMO that I played back in 2016, and admittedly, it was not a bad game at all. Honestly, it was one of the, if the only steampunk MMO that I had ever played other than Elion. That was more recently, back when it was Ascent Infinite Realm. This is a very traditional MMO. You can choose your race, your class, you customize your character in a pretty solid character creator, and you proceed to explore a large world filled with story and side quests. I was surprised when I saw how good this game actually looked, considering when this game was developed and published in the West. The character models look great even by today's standards, and even the environments look vibrant and beautiful. Translations were good, quests were pretty basic, about what you'd expect from a free game, but it was quite a bit of fun roaming the wasteland on steampunk motorbikes. Admittedly, the combat was not nearly as good as the rest of the game looked or was. It was tab target with the ability to place down your AoEs, but it was a little slow and was definitely inhibited by the FPS issues I was having, often actually leaving me frozen in place at times while being assailed by like 20 to 30 monsters. Again though, this is probably one of, if not the only steampunk MMO that I've ever played, and that alone warrants inclusion in this list. Much like Black Gold, the very first time I dipped my toes into RF Online was back in 2016, and at the time, not only did I not truly appreciate the game for what it was, but I was also a little bit harsh on it. However, after investing much more time into it, I came to realize that it was much better than I had initially given it credit for. There are a few different races and classes to choose between, a basic form of character creation, and then you're just thrown right into the game. While you technically do have a class, you're not limited to that class and weapon type specifically. You have the option of freely swapping between weapons, each providing a different style of play and having their own strengths and weaknesses. It was interesting since you could essentially run around with a greatsword one minute and then a staff the next, but thankfully there are enough abilities that it actually allows for you to customize the type of general class you want to ultimately end up playing. I did notice that the game was heavily grindy though, as in the game is predominantly you running around killing monsters with the occasional quest here and there, which, you know what, is perfectly fine. I get it. One of the most popular MMOs, Black Desert Online, is very much the same, and it is still alive and kicking. Scarlet Blade is an MMO that I've dedicated quite a bit of time to, and I promise guys, it is for reasons that you're not expecting. Well, yes, the characters are definitely the main appeal of the game. Not only does it have some solid customization options, but your characters are, well, a little more suggestive than almost any other MMO, but the game itself is actually filled with a lot of story and a lot of things to do, more than almost any other free MMO. And thanks to certain aesthetic choices, the game has retained quite a sizable player base ever since launching, regardless of either the Area Games version or the Vendetta one. The world is large yet split into segregated zones, but there are plenty of quest hubs to move between within each zone, providing you endless things to do and avoiding the horrendous grind that is so prevalent in some games. Combat is a hybrid between both tab target and action combat, and each class, which is essentially a customizable girl, functions and plays very differently from one another. And one of the best parts about Scarlet Blade to me, other than the females, is the fact that you actually get to transform into these giant mech monsters that make you feel like you're playing a Mobile Suit Gundam game after building up enough of the resource for it, and I am a huge fan of Gundams. You know what? I think there's actually a Trickster M. I feel like I did a video on this for my mobile channel a little while ago, but this game, Trickster Online, the PC version in specific, is quite an old one. This is a very, very old school point and click MMO that I bet many new generation players have never experienced. It's grindy, it doesn't provide much in the way of explanation. Movement requires you point to move your character and manually click on the enemy, each and every single enemy. I know this might sound incredibly dated to you, but it is one of the very few sprite sprite-styled, top-down isometric MMOs left with an anime-inspired style. And that is unfortunate, as those were the kinds of MMOs that I actually grew up playing. The graphics are absolutely adorable, the characters, both the portraits and in-game models, are both surprisingly high quality, and if you're into grinding, well, I mean, you know, here you go. Despite how Project Gorgon looks, this is actually a newer title, yeah, no kidding. Where most MMOs developed for this generation of gamer require prowess in terms of both graphical and gameplay mechanics to really garner attention, Project Gorgon and its devs instead opted to go for something a little easier to manage and a little more old school. And thus a brand new, classic-inspired MMORPG was created, in the form we have this in today. This is a game that has almost no hand-holding whatsoever. You're thrown directly into the game and you learn as you play, something that really isn't done anymore. Even WoW's latest Shadowlands leveling zone walks you through moving your character, each and every ability you learn, how to take quests, how to sell items. Like, guys, what happened to the days when we could just create our character, log in and play, consequences be damned, right? And that's kind of what Project Gorgon allows for, you to experience the game at your own pace and in your own way. Yes, the graphics and the combat are both, I mean, slow and clunky would be one way of putting it, but that doesn't inhibit the overall enjoyment you can get out of the game, nor does it limit the complexities that the game brings with it. This is admittedly something that I never really tried as extensively as I perhaps should have, and I have every intention of revisiting this game in due time. But until then, I would like to note that while I did not appreciate how unique an MMO this was at the time, I do urge people to take the time to try it out and judge for yourself whether or not this is an MMO that is worth playing. Yes, graphically, this is a very unique looking game. It does look very dated, and it feels even more so when you're in-game playing it, but just because something both looks and plays dated doesn't necessarily mean it's bad, right? I only ever invested maybe an hour into this game total, so my impression is definitely limited, but from what I'd experienced, this is yet another MMO that doesn't hold your hand and just throws you into the deep end without any knowledge as to what's actually going on. Yes, there is the occasional quest, there are a diverse selection of races and classes to choose from, there's also a whole lot to do and experience, you just kinda have to get there, and figuring out how to is part of that journey. Wizard 101 is probably the only type of MMO of this kind in this list. Not only is it a Western MMO, but, well, I mean, essentially, it is Harry Potter, the MMO. The entirety of the game takes place in a magical setting. Granted, I have never played this as much as I probably should have, but wandering around the magical city, questing and engaging in the combat, which is very unique, mind you, was a lot of fun. Combat is turn-based, with your party occupying one side of the instanced field and the enemies actually occupying the other. Questing was pretty basic, yet highly humorous, and the world itself was filled with life. This felt like I was playing through a cartoon, something that I really haven't ever experienced before. I really need to take a much deeper look at this game, and I know you guys have been asking for both Mrs. Sticks and I 2 for a while now, so we can get a proper gauge of what the game is at its core. But from what I could tell, this was a very simple, pretty traditional MMO with a lot of fancy magic spells. Onigiri is one of the few anime MMOs that I actually enjoy, and I enjoy it quite a bit too. It's like a very Japanese version of PSO2, but instead of featuring exclusively instant zones, you have access to a much more open, larger world, with dungeons being instanced off, but dungeons being the bulk of the game in terms of content. Combat is pure action, which was surprising to me, as I hadn't really seen many anime MMOs employ action combat. You have a selection of weapons you can equip, with each one having their own unique abilities and playstyles. There's a solid story. While nothing extraordinary, it is definitely enough to warrant paying attention to it. It isn't really too difficult, but it can definitely be a little repetitive if you're not a fan of games like Vindictus or Soul Worker or PSO2. I've played through a ton of hours of Onigiri and can happily say that this is one of the better anime MMOs out there in terms of gameplay and graphics. This one is actually quite a treasure. Okay, too much? Fine. Seriously though, this game actually looks pretty good, and it's one of the few pirate MMOs that are currently available. There are several different factions to choose between, with each faction having their own classes associated with them. Quite a bit of the game actually takes place on the ocean, with players gaining access to their own private ship that they can use to sail the high seas. You can dock your ship at various different ports scattered throughout the world though, which is where the vast majority of combat and questing happens to take place. The cities themselves are filled with life and NPCs, and enough where the game doesn't really feel very empty. The world is pretty large and it's fairly open with a lot of NPC ships and other players sailing around. There's also a lot to explore and a lot to learn, but this is probably one of the only MMOs of its kind. If you miss this opportunity to play this while it's here, you might regret it later. And finally, this is one of the few MMOs that I have ever seen. Well, I say one of the few, but this might be the only MMO that I've actually seen that does not have any type of combat present in game. Yeah, A Tale in the Desert is an MMO that is built completely around its community and the role-playing aspect of the game. I know you're not used to that. Typically, we just log into a game and within 30 seconds take a quest that tells us to go out and murder a bunch of monsters, right? This is a game that focuses on crafting, building up your faction, trading, exploring, researching, all things that aren't really all too common, especially with there being no combat present. Add on to that, the game only ever exists for a period of time, after which the world ends and begins a brand new season with entirely new features and goals. This provides a sense of continual growth and progression, but also means there's always a sense of things to do and things to work towards. Honestly, I've never had to play an MMO where I couldn't engage in combat before outside of this, but this was a very refreshing change of pace. And that right there is 10 obscure MMORPGs that you may or may not know exist. And I'm sure that there are quite a few of you that have played at least a few of these games. Maybe you've played more, I don't know, but at the same time, I guarantee you there's at least one here that you have not played before. Now, let me know down in the comment section below if you think I missed a game or you have a game that you believe warrants inclusion in a future list, and I'll go ahead and include it next time. Anyway guys, that is it for me. Thanks for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to subscribe for more content like this. I'll see you guys next time.
Someday soon, I'm gonna make